The central theme for the videos that I want to make is justice, which means wildly different things to different people. And when I stop to think about it, I don't exactly know what justice is myself. I have a general feeling for it, but I couldn't give a clear, concise definition. So I looked up in the dictionary and read through the various definitions and confirmed my feelings about justice, but still, it did not give me a definition. So I gave it some thought and tried to see if I could come up with a unifying definition of justice. And I think I did. I think I came up with something pretty good. Unfortunately, my thought process was completely non-linear, just not linear at all. So I drew a picture, and before I talk through my thought process, I just want to talk through that picture real quick. So I start with a dictionary, which doesn't give me a definition, but it gives me a list of synonyms. Some of these synonyms are internally incompatible with each other. But I thought that taken together, gathering as many synonyms as I could, that would give me the basis or define the solution space within which a unified concept and definition of justice could be defined. So I grouped these synonyms into like terms and looked for a way to synthesize them into a definition. First place I thought to look was at where these concepts of justice come from, their historical roots. These are divine command, natural law, and human convention. And as I thought about that, the only way that I could really synthesize these concepts was going to be conventional. And I wanted to make that process less arbitrary, so I came up with a set of canonization rules. And the rules are blanked out right here because there's a lot of creativity that goes into making these rules, and I'm not convinced that I necessarily have the best set. So I'm going to ask you to think about that later in the video. Taking the set of rules with the conceptual basis, I then wanted to synthesize my definition, but I didn't feel that I had enough to go on at that point. So I started looking at other sources of inspiration, and I used different terms that include the word justice, like justice system, social justice, distributive justice. And between these, I felt that I had a good way of grouping the conceptual bases together into what I'm calling my grand unified definition of justice, which again is blanked out because I'm going to ask you to try to come up with your own. Alright, so when we started, as I mentioned, started with the dictionary, which gave me a nice feeling for what the word justice means, but not an actual definition. It also gave me a list of synonyms, which I grouped together into like terms, which forms my conceptual basis that defines the domain space in which the word justice should be definable. So my basis pillars are equitable, the consistent ratio between input and results. When you think of person's qualifications times effort times time, divided by compensation is always equal to a constant. And then we have, I'm calling it equality of the first kind, and this is consistent results regardless of all factors. Regardless of qualifications, effort, and time, you get the same compensation. And my next grouping is lawful, impartial, equal before the law, what I'm calling equality of the second kind. And this is the uniform treatment of all persons, which, strictly speaking, is often unjust because the laws are unjust. Then we have moral, ethical, right, goodness, or virtuous. And I'm considering this basically the golden rule, doing to others as you would have them doing to yourself, plus 20% for observation bias. And then the final pillar is fair. And the word fair is a crime against the English language because it doesn't actually mean anything, and I advocate that it be summarily disposed of. Okay, so I want to link these together in a logically coherent way, and I don't know necessarily how to do that. So I looked for inspiration in where these concepts of justice originate. And these origins are divine command, natural law, or human convention. Divine command doesn't help me very much in terms of building unity and consensus because it first has no appeal to anyone who doesn't believe in a divinity, and even among those who do, there are compatibility issues between one divinity and another, and even with one single divinity. So I have to move on from there. I get natural law, which is paradoxical and kind of comical because the natural law is might is right. All of justice and all of civilization are a rebellion against natural law based on the belief that we can collectively do something better. So I'm not going to appeal to natural law at all. So that leaves me with human convention, which is uncomfortable for me because I associate conventional with arbitrary, which is specifically what I'm trying to avoid here. But my thinking on that is wrong, because we can take things that are conventional and make them not arbitrary by applying canonization filters. And the idea of canonization is that you set up a set of rules that you test your conventions with, so that all the conventions that pass are better than the conventions that don't pass. It's not a perfect system. Some conventions may pass that are not necessarily great, and some conventions may fail that are not necessarily bad, but it is definitely not arbitrary, and you are getting the better elements out of your convention set. So the ambiguity in this is how stringently to set the filter. In thinking about justice, I had to come up with a set of canonization filters. And I think I came up with a pretty good set of rules, but before I talk about what those are, I'd like you to pause the video and think about what filters you would apply to conventions in order to filter out good tenets of justice. So what I came up with for filter 1 is Kant's first formulation, the rule of universalism, and I state it as this: a proposed tenet of justice must remain agreeable if it were to be applied universally. And I think that's fairly straightforward, no need to expand on that. The second filter I came up with is less straightforward, and I state it as a tenet of justice must pass filter 1 from the perspective of every station of life: young and old, rich or poor, strong or weak. And the reason it's more tricky is that it implies the question of whom do we include in society? Should we include monkeys? And I realize that sounds like a really stupid question, but it's also a really important question because the sphere that defines society has changed a great deal throughout human history to include or exclude people based on wealth or gender or race. And people who are excluded from the sphere of society tend to be treated as animals. And at any point going into the future, any group of people can be designated as subhuman. So in considering the tenets of justice, it is important to consider from the perspective of all stations of life, not just human. An example of this, if I'm considering with the mindset that tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up as a chimpanzee, today do I make the decision whether or not it is just or unjust to take a chimpanzee, put it in a cage, and do medical experiments on it? And there's subjectivity to this. Granted, we're not all going to agree, but this is the mode of thinking that I am proposing that we require in filter 2. It's the other shoes filter. Okay, so I have all of my bases defined, and I've got my canonization rules defined. I should be able to put them together and form a grand unified definition of justice. Except that I can't. I'm not sure how to proceed from here. So I went looking for inspiration again, and I found several terms that include the word justice, and I thought those would help me tie everything together. I'm starting with social justice. That is the assurance that all persons, including those who have the least resource and agency, will benefit from being members of society, and that no person is treated by society in a manner that anyone else of sound mind would find unacceptable if the shoe were on the other foot. A few pillars of justice are implied here. The first is equity. The harder I work, the more I expect to get paid. Therefore, in considering the acceptable treatment of someone who works harder than me, I would require that person to be paid more. The second is morality. This is entirely about thinking of the welfare of others. And then third is equality of the first kind, and that is the trading places consideration for both the least and the most powerful of society. The next term I want to look at is the justice system, which in theory is the lawful, impartial, equally applied response to persons who have committed actions that are harmful to the interests and values of society or other persons. As such, the justice system is defined in context of social justice. And the obvious pillar that's included here is the lawful, impartial, equality of the second kind. The third expression that I stumbled across is distributive justice, and that is the way that goods and resources are and ought to be distributed in society. Now, in terms of building unity, I don't think that I'm going to be able to use this term at all because basically every aspect of it is hotly contested, such as, are people entitled to the necessary goods and resources to survive? And if they are, to what quality of life are they entitled? If they're not, are they entitled to the opportunity to support themselves? Not everyone thinks so, and there's a great deal of debate on this issue. So I'm just going to skip that one, and I think I have enough to work with in terms of social justice and the justice system in order to put together one grand unified definition of justice. Now, again, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and think about how you would define the grand unified definition of justice, because there is a leap of creativity here. I don't think this is an obvious step. And if you come up with a definition that you think is better than mine, or canonization rules that you think are better than mine, please share those with me and explain to me why they're better. I would really appreciate that. So, I came up with this for my grand unified definition of justice. That justice is the collective protection and provision for the rights and interests of each individual. And that's it. That's the point of this video. But before I close, I want to point out some similarities between my definition for justice and the definition for social contract, the agreement among individuals by which society becomes organized and invested with the right to secure mutual protection and welfare, and also civilization, the social process whereby societies achieve an advanced stage of development and organization. Now, if you watched this video this far, you probably already care about justice. But I do think it's important to comment on why we should care about justice, and everyone needs to care about justice. And that is, put simply, that is the responsibility of every civilized person. And if you are not working towards the advancement of justice, you have no dignity as a civilized person. There is a lot more that I want to say regarding why we should care about justice. I'm actually very personally excited about justice, and I'll talk about that in my second video. So to recap, I start with the dictionary definition of justice, which doesn't really give me a definition, but does give me a list of synonyms. So I organize these synonyms together into pillars that form my conceptual basis or solution space in which a unified definition of justice should be definable. But I'm not sure where to go from there, so I look for inspiration from the sources of these concepts, divine command, natural law, human convention, and decide that I have to use human convention, which I don't like because I think that's kind of arbitrary. So to make it less arbitrary, I develop canonization rules and come up with Kant's first formulation, the rule of universalism. A tenet of justice must still be desirable if applied universally. And my second rule is universality of perspective, or the other shoes rule. A tenet of justice must pass the first rule from the perspective of every station of life. And with these two together, we must reject any tenet of justice that is explicitly designed to benefit one group over or to the exclusion of another. So, in theory, that's everything that I need to build a grand unified definition, but I still wasn't sure where to go, so I looked for more inspiration with expressions that use the word justice, distributive justice, justice system, and social justice. And between these, I felt that all of the major pillars in my conceptual basis were covered, and I was just looking for a way to unify these definitions. And the unification I came up with is that justice is the collective protection and provision for the rights and interests of each individual. Well, I'll leave off with this. my appeal to you as a civilized and dignified person is that you consider and reconsider the ways in which your life is contributing to either the advancement of justice or impeding the advancement of justice. Thank you.